Snow drifted across the mountains like ghostly waves under the pale Christmas moon. The wind howled through the pines, rattling branches and shaking loose clumps of ice that crashed onto the frozen ground below. Most people in the valley were gathered around warm fireplaces, sharing meals and exchanging gifts. But high above town, where the roads disappeared into wilderness, Elijah Boone walked alone. Everyone knew Elijah. The giant mountain man lived in a hand-built cabin near the ridge. He trapped game, chopped timber, and disappeared for weeks into the forest without speaking to another soul. Children whispered stories about him. Adults respected him but kept their distance. Some called him a hermit. Others called him broken. Neither description was entirely wrong. 10 years earlier, Elijah had lost his wife and young daughter during a terrible winter accident. Since then, he had withdrawn from the world. The mountains became his refuge. Solitude became his shield. Christmas meant nothing to him anymore. At least, that was what he told himself. That Christmas Eve, Elijah was returning from checking trap lines before a storm worsened. Snow already reached halfway up his boots, and dark clouds gathered across the peaks. Then he noticed something unusual. A faint glow. His brow furrowed. Nobody lived in this section of the mountain. The light flickered weakly from an abandoned storage shed nearly a mile from his cabin. Elijah changed direction. As he approached, concern replaced curiosity. The shed door hung partially open. Snow had blown inside. The light came from a nearly dead lantern. And in the corner sat a young woman. She couldn't have been older than 25. Her coat was thin. Her face was pale. One hand rested protectively over her heavily pregnant belly. The other clutched a small backpack. For a moment she looked up with frightened eyes. Then she tried to stand. Her legs gave out instantly. Elijah reached her before she hit the floor. She flinched. Not from surprise. From fear. That tiny reaction hit him harder than he expected. This wasn't someone afraid of strangers. This was someone accustomed to being hurt. "What are you doing here?" Elijah asked. Her lips trembled. "I just needed somewhere to stay." The answer made no sense. Nobody ended up on this mountain by accident. Especially not in weather like this. "You'll freeze before morning." She lowered her eyes. "Maybe." The single word stopped him cold. There was no panic in her voice. No argument. No denial. Just acceptance. As though she had already made peace with whatever happened next. Elijah studied her carefully. The exhaustion. The hunger. The bruised shadows beneath her eyes. The hopelessness. He recognized it because years ago he had seen the same expression in his own reflection. Without another word, he picked up her backpack. "Come on." She blinked. "What?" "You're coming with me." Fear immediately returned. "I don't want trouble." "Neither do I." "I can leave if." "You're staying." The firmness in his voice ended the discussion. Minutes later they were moving through deep snow toward his cabin. The journey was slow. Several times she stumbled. Each time Elijah steadied her without comment. Eventually warm light appeared between the trees. For the first time since finding her, he saw something besides fear in her eyes. Relief. The cabin glowed like a beacon against the darkness. Inside, heat from the wood stove filled every corner. The woman stared around as though entering another world. Elijah handed her a blanket. "Sit." She obeyed. Then he prepared soup from a pot hanging over the stove. The smell alone nearly made her cry. When he placed the bowl in front of her, she hesitated. "You don't have to. Eat." Her hands shook as she lifted the spoon. One bite became another. Then another. Soon tears rolled silently down her cheeks. Elijah pretended not to notice. People deserved dignity. Especially when they were hurting. After several minutes she whispered, "Thank you." He nodded. "What is your name?" "Sarah." "Elijah." She managed a weak smile. "I know." Of course she did. Everyone in the county knew the mountain man. The silence that followed felt strangely comfortable. Outside, the storm intensified. Snow hammered the windows. Wind screamed across the roof. Inside, the fire crackled. For the first time in years, Elijah wasn't spending Christmas alone. Neither of them mentioned it. Hours passed. Eventually Sarah appeared stronger. Color slowly returned to her face. Elijah finally asked the question that had been bothering him. "Where's the father?" The room instantly changed. Her expression collapsed. The fragile comfort vanished. Elijah regretted asking. Then she spoke. "My husband died 3 months ago." He remained silent. "My husband was a volunteer firefighter." Her voice cracked. "There was a warehouse fire." The words came slowly. Painfully. "He went inside to save people." She swallowed hard. "He never came out." Elijah stared into the fire. He knew loss. Not intellectually. Personally. Deeply. Sarah continued. "After he died, everything fell apart." She twisted her fingers together. "His family blamed me." "Why?" "They said I distracted him." The statement sounded absurd. Cruel. Heartless. Yet Elijah knew grieving people often searched desperately for someone to blame. "My savings disappeared paying bills." She laughed bitterly. Funny how quickly life collapses. Elijah didn't answer. Because he understood exactly what she meant. Sarah's eyes filled with tears again. Then she said something that changed everything. Something Elijah would never forget. "I wasn't running from the storm." He looked up. She stared directly at him. "I came up here because I didn't want my baby to be born believing nobody wanted us." The word struck him like lightning. For a moment he couldn't breathe. Sarah continued quietly. "I know that sounds foolish. It doesn't. My husband's family threw me out." She wiped her eyes. "My landlord wanted rent I couldn't pay. I had nowhere left." The cabin fell silent. Then came the sentence that shattered the walls Elijah had spent 10 years building around his heart. She placed both hands on her stomach and whispered. "This child is all I have left of the man I loved." Elijah looked away toward the fire. Because suddenly he wasn't seeing flames. He was seeing memories. A smiling wife. A laughing daughter. A life stolen by winter. A grief he had buried beneath years of isolation. And for the first time in a decade, he realized something startling. Maybe surviving wasn't the same thing as living. Maybe hiding from pain wasn't healing. And maybe, on this cold Christmas night, fate had brought a freezing widow to his door for a reason he didn't yet understand. As the storm raged outside, Elijah stared into the fire and made a silent decision. Whatever happened next. Sarah and her unborn child would not face it alone. The storm raged throughout the night, burying the mountain beneath fresh layers of snow. Wind slammed against the cabin walls, but inside, warmth and light pushed back the darkness. Sarah eventually fell asleep on the small bed Elijah had prepared near the stove. Elijah remained awake. He sat in his wooden chair, staring into the fire. Her words echoed endlessly in his mind. "This child is all I have left of the man I loved." For years he had convinced himself that isolation was strength. He believed that if he avoided attachments, he could avoid heartbreak. Yet one frightened widow and her unborn child had exposed the lie he had been living. Near dawn, Sarah suddenly cried out. Elijah jumped to his feet. She was clutching her stomach. Her face had gone pale. A sharp gasp escaped her lips. Sarah? Another wave of pain hit. Then her eyes widened. Oh no. Understanding struck immediately. The baby was coming. How far apart? Elijah asked. What? The pains. They've been coming every few minutes. His heart pounded. The nearest hospital was over 40 miles away. The roads were completely blocked. No ambulance could reach them in this storm. For the first time in years, Elijah felt genuine fear. Not for himself. For someone else. Another contraction bent Sarah forward. Tears filled her eyes. The baby isn't due for another month. It's going to be okay. But even as he spoke, he wasn't sure. He had delivered calves. He had helped injured hikers. He had survived blizzards. But he had never delivered a baby. Outside, the storm showed no signs of stopping. Elijah grabbed the emergency radio he rarely used. After several attempts, he finally connected with a volunteer rescue operator in town. The signal crackled. The roads are impossible, the operator explained. Nobody can reach you until the storm eases. Elijah looked toward Sarah. Another cry of pain echoed through the cabin. Then tell me what to do. For the next several hours, the rescue operator and an experienced nurse guided Elijah through every step. The morning passed in a blur. Water boiled on the stove. Clean blankets were prepared. Sarah fought through wave after wave of pain. And Elijah never left her side. Whenever fear appeared in her eyes, he reminded her to breathe. Whenever she thought she couldn't continue, he encouraged her. At one point she grabbed his hand so tightly her nails dug into his skin. He didn't pull away. The mountain man who had spent a decade avoiding people suddenly found himself becoming the one person standing between a frightened mother and despair. By late afternoon, the moment arrived. The cabin echoed with Sarah's cry. Then, a new sound filled the room. Small. Fragile. Beautiful. A baby's cry. For 1 second nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then tears flooded Sarah's face. It's a girl, Elijah whispered. The newborn continued crying loudly. Strongly. Alive. Sarah held her daughter against her chest and sobbed. Not from sadness. From overwhelming relief. The child had survived. They both had. The storm still roared outside, but somehow it no longer seemed frightening. For the first time in years, the cabin felt like a home. 3 days later the roads finally opened. Rescue crews reached the mountain. Doctors examined Sarah and the baby. Both were healthy. News of the Christmas miracle spread quickly throughout the valley. People who had spent years gossiping about Elijah suddenly saw him differently. The lonely mountain man had saved a widow and helped deliver her child during the worst storm of the winter. But the biggest change happened inside Elijah himself. When Sarah prepared to leave a week later, she stood beside the truck that would take her back to town. The baby slept peacefully in her arms. Neither spoke for several moments. Finally Sarah smiled. You saved our lives. Elijah shook his head. You did the hard part. She laughed softly. Then her eyes grew serious. What happens now? The question caught him off guard. He had spent so many years alone that he hadn't thought beyond the storm. Sarah looked toward the cabin. Then back at him. I don't really have anywhere to go. The words hung in the cold air. Elijah knew exactly what she meant. The apartment she had lost was gone. The family who abandoned her had not changed. She still had nothing. Except her daughter. And somehow, that little girl had already changed his life. The baby suddenly opened her eyes. Tiny blue eyes. Curious eyes. She stared directly at him. Something shifted inside his heart. A place he believed had died years ago suddenly came alive. "What did you name her?" he asked. Sarah smiled. Hope. The name felt perfect. Because Hope was exactly what had arrived at his cabin that Christmas night. Not just for Sarah. For him too. Months passed. Spring slowly replaced winter. Snow melted from the mountains. Wildflowers returned. And Sarah never left. At first she stayed temporarily. Then she helped repair the cabin. She planted a garden. She laughed again. Little Hope grew stronger every day. The cabin that once felt empty became filled with life. Filled with conversation. Filled with tiny footsteps. Filled with love. The townspeople watched in amazement. The mountain man who barely spoke now smiled regularly. He attended community events. Helped neighbors. Even hosted gatherings at the cabin. One afternoon nearly a year later, Elijah stood outside watching Hope take her first steps across the grass. Sarah stood beside him. Neither spoke. The child stumbled forward, laughing. Then she reached Elijah and wrapped her tiny arms around his leg. He lifted her into his arms. Hope giggled. Sarah smiled through tears. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to think that Christmas was the night everything ended." Elijah looked at the child in his arms. Then at the woman beside him. "No." Sarah nodded.